Hello and welcome to the Down Roll, and welcome everybody. Oh, I got feedback. Hold on one second. It's either one way or the other with me, obviously. Either got it too much or not enough. Oh, so hello again. I'm Will DM, and this is the Down Roll. We're a role-playing show where we basically talk about, anything. Tonight you just have my smiling face to be to entertain you. But on other nights we might have other folk, some guests sit in, talk about different topics. Granted, this will be a little bit DM Dungeons and Dragons centric. Probably most of the examples, everything that you hear, will be pertaining to different D&D games. But it's really for any kind of role playing in general. Oh, great! And then there goes my phone. So let me put that on. There we go. Okay, so where was I? Hold on a second. Let me see if I can get some other interruptions. So anyway, today we're going to be talking about a topic that and when I've been trying to come up with different topics for talking about and sharing with you, this is one of the things that tends to come up again and again with whatever the topic is that I'm talking about. It's pretty centric to pretty much everything when it comes to role playing, and basically, it's that it's your players, and not just your players mattering as far as to you, but to you and your players, and basically the whole dynamic between you, your players, and your players' dynamic interaction with each other. So that is pretty much the the topic of tonight. And so let me go ahead and I'm starting to ramble here. Let me go ahead and dive into that. Basically, what it is when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons or any kind of role playing game, you're going to be playing it with a group of people. And that dynamic between the players and the dungeon master is critical to how things will transpire within the game, and then will correlate into how much fun everybody is having. Now, it's a hard thing to do. Most people, when they're introduced to role playing, they're introduced to it either through friends or family. And basically, everybody has different types of friends, and different types of friends, and interact in different kinds of ways. One of those. And you don't really know necessarily how those interactions between somebody who might be a great friend who's introducing you to Dungeons and Dragons, and how your role playing interaction will be. You have different personalities, and so basically, let me start giving you some examples again, because I'm starting to ramble here. Different players enjoy different aspects of role play. You have players who really enjoy combat. And so, because they enjoy combat, they're combat orientated, and they could care less about other aspects, and they're just waiting for the next encounter, the next time to get to roll dice, to swing a sword, to fight. So, if you as the dungeon master are presenting to them, a story or a plot for them to follow, you might have got a lot of finger drumming and rolling and eye rolling, and the players go into the bar, and they have to meet as some sort of contact, and you've devised this exchange between them and this NPC that you've cooked up, and come to their mind, and all this player really wants to do is like, okay, whatever, and then maybe one of your players is actually engaged and enjoying in that, and that might be the player that is really into the role playing aspect of it, and they want to sit down and talk and have a huge long conversation with this person. Now, these are two different examples of different types of approaches and what these people might like, and you can get a situation where if there's too much role playing or not enough action, those who crave that in their game are going to start probably doing some really stupid junk, okay? And basically what they're going to do is they're going to create situations that are going to basically really jack up the continuity of the story, the fun of some of the other players. I mean, everybody's had one. Well, if he doesn't tell me what I want to know, I'm going to just pull out my sword. I'm going to cut his head off, right in the middle of a bar, or say the street with the cops right down the road, or it's like, because those are the players that are trying to direct the game into the direction in which they want it to go. Same thing happens with those who are possibly role-playing eccentric, and they want to focus more on the dialogue and between the players and the NPCs and what have you. And so because of that, they then can just as easily take a situation and if they're bored or what have you, might start throwing a wrench into to the works because they're not happy with how the situation goes. Now, those are examples of just basically how certain players can act within a game according to what they're expecting and what their expectations out of the game are. Okay, and that's really what it all comes down to. That's the big thing about this sort of thing. So, what this is about is you as a DM and as a player, it's your job actually to know your players and your players, or if you are a player, to know your DM. Okay. For some reason, this gets overlooked quite a bit when it comes to role playing and to topics that are talked about. Okay. Again, when you're role playing with friends, family, you're kind of put into a position where you don't really want to say anything, or it's like, well, you just kind of go with the flow, or you don't want to mention something because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, which is all fine and dandy, and you can do that sort of thing. And but the truth of the matter is everybody's going to role play to have a good time. And if you're role playing to have a good time, then it is imperative for you as a player to know what you like, and two, what you like out of your dungeon master. You as a dungeon master should know what you like out of your players. And vice versa, So this is something that, when it's hard to find a group, doesn't necessarily it gets pushed to the back burner because everybody's like, hey, I'll take bad D&D over no D&D, or role play, because you just want a game, you want to have fun, you want to roll some dice, you want to have a good time. So but for the long-term stability of a campaign, the long-term stability of just everybody having fun, that's really important to understand how your players are. Now, we'll take a look at you as if you're a dungeon master, game master. What's your job? How can you do this to make things smoother and better between yourself and your players, or your characters? I mean, your players and yourself. One, ask them. I mean, that sounds like a really, really simple suggestion, but you'd be surprised. Probably the number one pitfall that dungeon masters and game masters fall into is they get their juices flowing, their brain starts crunking around, and like, oh, that's a great idea. Maybe I should do. Oh, and they start trotting stuff down and writing it up, and they're getting this big old, elaborate story cooked up in their head, and they're like, hey, this is going to be great. This is how it's going to be. And they're not taking into consideration the players. The biggest part of the game. The game itself is nothing without the players. Without the players, you're just a guy who likes to make stories, which there's nothing wrong with that. And hey, man, if that's what you want to do, go do it. Go knock it out. But role playing is about your interaction with your players and taking what your players do and then turning that back around into the story, and then it's that constant give and take. So the first thing you should do is talk to your players. Now, it might seem funny, but there's a great idea to do is just put together a questionnaire. Put together some questions as far as what your players like. How much do you like combat in your games? Give a percentage. How much do you like role-playing in your games? Give a percentage. Then you can start to get a little bit more in-depth. How much do you like high fantasy versus sword and sorcery or grimdark? Do you like a lot of magic? Um, how do you think races should interact in a world? See, these are all questions that are starting to. You can get like a huge list of these. I wouldn't say go too overboard, but at least get enough so that you get a really good general idea of who your players are. And see what their opinions are on these things. Now, the dungeon master at that time, you could take those, or you could just have a conversation. You don't even need to write up a questionnaire, and just take notes of the conversation with the people. I would suggest, though, if you're going to do it as a conversation, believe it or not, don't do it in a group. Because what'll end up happening is if you do it in a group, there's going to be a bunch of opinions flying around all over the place. Okay, when those opinions are flying around all over the place, you're going to miss something. You'll either miss it by you won't write it down, you'll forget it. This person will say something, then this person says something. You're like, oh, and it's like, oh, and then what did you say? And then they forgot. So if you can, then just like carve out a little bit of time, have a one-on-one conversation with your players and see what they like. See what they would like to see in their games. Ask them what kind of movies they like. That right there, what kind of books do they like to read? Those types of information, that's a really easy, quick way for you to get a good idea of something that will interest them within the campaign. Once you get all this information back, then it's your job to take that information and mold that into something that your players will like through your filter, making it something that you enjoy and would like to do, and then trying to build that up into something that would be, compatible for everybody. Now, what's your job as a player with your DM? Okay. One of the biggest things that players don't do, and again, it's because people are polite. I hear Canadians are terrible about this. Just kidding. It's you should open your mouth and tell the DM or the game master how you feel about a certain thing. I recently had a player. We were starting a new campaign. We'd rolled up some characters, and I was doing it in an old school style where it wasn't done off a point system. I had it rolled up, 3 sets, drop your, 3 sets of stats rolled up, dropping a 4th die, blah, blah, blah. Old school grognards and whatnot. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. So, rolled up the stats. This gives an opportunity for a lot of. You could have some really good stats, you can have some really bad stats, but then you also have characters that could have like super good stats, and then some characters that get like, don't really have good stats at all. Well, it kind of had polar opposites in this when in character creation. There's a character that had a lot of good stats, and then there's one it was basically mediocre across the board. Now, the thing of it is that with some players, depending on who you are, they will love that and they'll run with it. They'll just run with it and go hog wild. Others, it ruins it for them. So I had found out that the player wasn't too happy about it and was kind of down in the mouth. Now, I know there's some trepidation with players approaching dungeon masters and game masters with their problems because there's an awful lot of DMs and GMs out there that shoot stuff down. This is the way I'm doing it. This is the way I'm running it. That's probably a more prevalent way of people doing stuff than the other. I'm extremely flexible in how I do things. And the reason I'm extremely flexible is because the first thing in mind for me is for the players to have fun. Because once the players start having fun, I start having fun. And then I can start fucking with them. So there you go. That's my whole deal. Now, I found out, and I'm like, hey, I heard that you're not happy with your character. Let's do something about that. Wound up making a whole new character. And, he made some rolls again, and he wasn't too happy about any of his rolls. And, I'm not one for a stickler. Now, granted, in 5th edition, you have progression is fairly well laid out and mapped, and it's pretty easy. But I went ahead, go ahead, start off, man. Give yourself an 18. You ain't got anything that's above a 16 on your sheet, man. Go ahead and give it to you. Made him happy, and then he's happy with his character. When he's happy with his character, then he plays better. But that's the player's job. You can't be upset. I mean, not upset, but you can't be afraid to approach your dungeon master or game master and talk to him about this and ask him these sort of things. If you would like to see a particular thing in the game, talk to your dungeon master or game master. Talk to him about it. Hey, there's just an awful lot of magical weapons. I'm kind of more of a low techy kind of guy, man. Can you do something about that? Talk to him about it. If the dungeon master's there and doing their job right, then they're going to do something about that. They'll help you out. That's not a problem. Now, this goes into the final portion of players and dungeon masters, and your players matter. This is that it is okay to not want to play with a certain group or a dungeon master. I do know it's hard sometimes, depending in the market that you're in, that it's hard to find players. Not as much as it used to be. It used to be, you didn't have the resources, and for one, you didn't have the huge player base that now exists out there. But it's okay not to like playing with somebody. And it doesn't make them this, and I think this is the big problem, is that people, when they feel that if they don't want to game with somebody, it's a personal assault or affront to that person and their character. It is not. It is basically you don't like their style of play, and that's fine. You don't have to. Same thing goes with dungeon masters. Dungeon masters will have characters that, not characters, but players that they just don't get along with as far as in the game. Okay? Now remember, most of these people that are introducing you to these things are friends and family. Well, they're your friends and family for a reason. You probably like them for some reason. Maybe not so much with the family, but you know what I'm talking about. So, you can then, it's okay for you to then back away and decide, this isn't for me. I'm going to step away, and I'm going to go and find my role-playing experience someplace else. It's not an easy thing to do. I get that. Not a problem. But if you ever find yourself in those situations, essentially how you can approach it is not, I don't like the way you DM. I don't like the way you play. That's not how you do it. That's not how you approach somebody on something like this. You say, the style of game that you're running, it's just not my cup of tea. It's not something that I like. I prefer this. Same thing with the player. Your style of play doesn't fit into the campaign setting or the theme of the game that I'm running. And it's the job of both the dungeon master and game master, and it's the job of the player to both understand that, know that, work towards that, and then do something to remedy this situation. I myself have quit games after quickest session I ever quit. This is on Roll20. Went through a process, was a reply to the posting, so forth and so on. Went through a very small vetting process. Logged in. I played 10 minutes and then excused myself and said, guys, this isn't going to work out. This is just not my style of play. I'm not going to have fun with it. And that was it. And then I was gone. Now, that was the quickest one. I have, it's when their deal was all about killing unicorns and magical fey creatures in the wild and dissecting them. And, hey, man, to somebody's campaign, that might be your cup of tea. You might like that. I personally, that was not my deal. It's not my bag. It's nothing that I want. So, now, basically, what as a dungeon master, game master, and a player, these are some things that you should look for to give you a little bit of a hint as far as, or do, that you're going to have a better game, or something to give you better players and a better group. Okay, one, always vet your players. Unless you know the person that's coming in and you've gamed with them for a long time, there is absolutely nothing wrong in the world with vetting them. Asking them to fill out a questionnaire and give you some information about themselves. Now, I'm not saying what their shoe size is and where they went to school. I'm talking about, hey, what's your favorite books? What's your favorite movie? What's the type of style of campaign you like to play? Tell me your favorite character. If you could play any one fictional character in movies, TVs, or books in a game, which one would it be? Something you really want to feel them out. There's nothing wrong with that, and you should do that. Now if you take that's as a dungeon master, you should do something along these lines. Now let's flip that. If you're the player and you're out and you're looking for a game, if you see a dungeon master who's wanting this kind of information from you, it's not necessarily that he's going to be a railroad dictator trying to make sure that everything fits exactly into their game and their world how they want it to be. It could be, hey, that guy's really doing something smart there because he's trying to get the right people. Something that I do with all my online stuff, and I've been a party to, is auditions. And there's nothing wrong with auditions. I do streams, and I do multiple auditions. I will get a group of players together, collect them up, set up, and have an audition game. And then through that audition game, then I'll just pick the people who I think will work the best in the game going forward from that point. Some people do, get their feelings hurt if they're not selected. But the thing of it is in that situation, and we'll take, for example, when I ran auditions for streaming, like when I was doing the auditions for Return to the Bandit Kingdoms, I had a bunch of great players. And then, some of these players, I told, I think, by not being picked is by no means saying that I think that you're less of a caliber of a role player than this person over here. All I'm saying is that I think you'll fit better into the campaign, and I think you'll fit better into a streaming environment, because home tabletop is a completely different beast from streaming. Anybody want to tell you different? They don't know what they're talking about. It's not true. So, that's what you should look for. Look for a dungeon master, game master that is in wishing to get involved with the process of who's coming in and finding out information about the players beforehand. Now, if you are a player, you do the same thing to the dungeon master. If the dungeon master has a questionnaire for them, I'm not saying you write up a questionnaire and have to give them one as well, but have your questions ready. Ask the dungeon master, game master, how do you feel about races? How do you feel about magical items? How do you, what would you consider your style of play? Ask them these things so that you can know beforehand, so that when you get into the game, you're not surprised or blindsided, and you haven't wasted everybody's time, because a lot of times this stuff isn't going to come out in the wash until several sessions in or a little while later. And that's where the problem would be. Now, like we said, there's certain markets are a lot harder to find players than others. I'm actually in an extremely good market for role players, and the community here in Denver is great. But you might not be there. So, where do you find people? What do you do? What are the resources that are available out there to you where you can go? Well, back in the day when us grognards wanted to do it, before this internet stuff, you would go down to your local game shop, and they would have posts up. They have a bulletin board where people put things up there. Now, those still exist, although I would say I think the last time I was in one of the local hobby shops around me, and I actually just stopped and I looked at it, and it's like I don't think that thing had been updated in like 5 years. Easy. I mean, there was stuff on there. It's like circa 1983, looking for a group, So, but it still can be done. And the one thing about that, this is if you're looking for in-person people. Now, if the bulletin board isn't necessarily still being utilized, there's those guys behind the counter. They know the customer base and they know people, and they might be able to recommend you someplace one way or another. Another super great way to find players and to meet players in your local area is to go to your local game conventions. Now, I'm not talking the Gen Cons or things like that, these big mega conventions. Those are great fun. Please go. I highly recommend it. If you've never gone, it'll be an experience. But go to your local gaming conventions. Those are local people. Granted, there are people that come in, but the chances of you finding more people there are much higher than others. And you can network and try and find people that way. And even more, you could maybe even game with them and get a little insight into who and how they are. You could go and play some games there, and it's like, oh wow, you were a great DM, man. Do you got any open spots, or where you at? And blah blah blah. So that's more of your local stuff. Oh, there's also too. Almost forgot to mention. There's the Adventure League, which I think that's still the. I really don't play in those. I'm more of a homebrew kind of guy, so I've never gotten into it. I did play City of Ravensbluff back in the day, and I did do Living Greyhawk back in the 90s. That too, you can find those local events, and you can actually go onto the Wizards of the Coast website, find that, and find games all over the place. Again, that's an introductory in. You'll actually get to meet and actually play with certain people, and then you can go out from there. Now, one of the best I find for helping with finding players in a local way is Meetup. Actually, now I'm going to go into to some of your online stuff. You can join the Meetups, and they have different games that are posted all the time with people running different things, and get-togethers where social events where you can get together with other gamers and rub elbows, and you guys could talk games and find other players. So I highly recommend that. Just go online, put in Meetup, put your city, do a little bit of search around, and something's going to come up. Guarantee it. Now, there's also places like Reddit and a bazillion other different online forums that you can go to. That's a little bit harder to pinpoint if you're trying to get people locally to have face-to-face interaction with. Now, the online gaming is great. It's freaking awesome because now you can be anywhere in the world, and through services like Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, you can play virtually all the time, anywhere, and that is so good. I mean, it's such a boon for the industry and helping it grow, because people who maybe are a little apprehensive about going out and doing a face-to-face type of gaming can get their feet wet and get a good experience by going in and doing it virtually. And trust me, these services are not hard to use. It's not rocket science. Roll20 is free. You can get into that. If you know of a dungeon master with Fantasy Grounds, you can get in there. It's free to join up on Fantasy Grounds, but not necessarily run games or what have you. But the cost is pretty minimal. But there's plenty of ways for you to go out and search and find people virtually to play now, and they have game postings on those sites. You go, you join, you start looking. Oh, that looks good. Maybe I want to play that one, and then you try it out. Now, with the virtual stuff and whatnot, and like with anything, there's a lot of trial and error, and you're going to get lemons, and you're not going to get all your good campaigns or good groups out of it. I will say that I have 2 Roll20 groups. I have one that's going on 2 years and one that's going on a year, and I don't see an end time in the foreseeable future. And I've made great friends, and I'll be role playing with them in way far into the near future. If you watch Return to the Bandit Kingdoms, Adam and I actually met through Roll20. So trust me, there's plenty of great people out there. So to wrap it all up, basically, as in like I have the title is your players matter. What that means is what your players think matters. How you interact with them matters. And vice versa, how they think of you. Now, what that's going to do, it's going to affect the entire game. And this is the point why I wanted to do this video before I started doing many other ones. Because I'm always coming back to know your players. There's tons of all this information out there, and I do different types of shows and write things where you give advice and what have you. And it's like first thing that always into my mind is like, well, my players want to do this or so want to do that, and it's like, well, you should know your players. What do your players want? How do your players want to play? How do you want to DM or GM them? That is so important. Don't ignore that, and don't think that if you're a player that it has to be the DM's way, and or vice versa. Both of you guys can figure it out and come to agreements. And when you do this beforehand and are selective about it, you're going to find that you will get a better result in the end. You'll be with a group that you mesh with, that things go well with, and that the adventures will be better, and you'll have a lot more laughs and a lot more good times. So apologize for all my rambling, but that happens when you get to be this age. So again, hey, thank you for tuning in and watching it, and be sure to watch Return to the Bandit Kingdoms. It's on Tuesdays at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Ravana is back up and running again on Friday nights, 9 o'clock, both on Twitch over at Wicked Studios LLC at Twitch. And you can find all that stuff on YouTube as well. I don't have an actual schedule for when I'll be recording more of these. I'm just going to kind of record them and stick them in. But you will be able to find these on YouTube if you just look for the the down roll. And you should be able to get those up, or you can always go and subscribe to the channels. So I want to again say thank you very much, and hey, if you got any comments, please leave them in the suggestions below, especially when it's over on YouTube. Feel free to go over to Facebook, and you can look up Wicked Studios LLC. Join us over there, shoot questions to us, send us messages, story ideas, any of that sort of thing. Definitely love interacting with everybody, and we are of course, more than willing to incorporate it, or if you've got an issue, address it in a show. So, all right, thanks.